Have you ever walked away from a conversation thinking things like, I wonder if they even heard me? Or better yet, have you ever realized in a conversation that you are just sitting, waiting for your turn to respond? Listen, as leaders, it's our job to make sure that we're great listeners. Now, I know most leaders think they're pretty good listeners, but are you? That's what we're talking about today, because we need to evaluate that and make sure that we are great listeners. How are you listening? Listening is the leadership skill that most of us are overlooking, but it can be very detrimental to your team. It's the Leaders Aware podcast. I'm Alfonzo Jones, and I am so grateful that you are here. By the way, have I ever mentioned that the Leaders Aware podcast is a product of Trifecta Prime Leadership? This is a leadership development firm, and we're making leaders aware as well. So I just want to put that out there. I don't know if I've said that much. I need to say it more. Listen, if you like the podcast, please follow, like, share, rate, comment on all platforms. We're on YouTube. Check us out on Instagram, Alfonzo Jones 2, Facebook, all the likes. Check me out. Look me up. But let's get into this content for today, Leaders Aware, because we have some work to do. Listen, there's a quote by Stephen Covey that says, "Seek first to understand, then to be understood." And that's a dynamic quote. But the root of that quote is the listening component. How can you understand a person if you don't listen? You got to listen. So there's also a quote that he says, most leaders do not listen to understand. They listen to reply. And that's dangerous. They listen to reply. Yikes. So here's the thing. We're going to talk about this listening thing again because it can cost you as a leader. It can cost influence. It can cost your effectiveness. It can cost the trust that your team has for you. And those are all important elements. So the thing that we want to kind of dive into first is I want to call this the listening trap. Why don't we listen correctly? Why don't we actively listen? And we're going to talk about active listening in a minute. Because the reason, especially for leaders, okay, because I know as leaders, we have deadlines, we have things that we have to get done, and we're problem solvers. So sometimes, not all the time, sometimes we as leaders listen to solve a problem. And when that happens, we can sometimes miss the validity and the emotion in the conversation that we're having. And even that, with that being said, sometimes, people in general, people respond based on emotion first and logic second. People respond on emotion first, logic second. And that's the average individual. Right now, we're working on upgrading our listening skills and responding skills. So once we understand this concept of how most people respond, and think about it. Do you do that? Now we understand that we have to evaluate it. Someone says something that triggers you. Now all of a sudden, you're ready to go for blows. Not you as a leader. I'm talking about the people around you, not necessarily you. But it triggers you. It triggers something inside of you. And have you ever in that moment stopped listening and then be prepared to, oh yeah, they're about to get this work. I'm about to give them a piece of my mind. I am going to tell them about themselves. Or better yet, I am about to defend myself. This is a problem. this is a problem. So when these type things happen, as a listener and as a leader, we have to be aware of these things. We have to evaluate. And this, again, this is just my challenge today, to help you evaluate your listening skills. Because it is a leadership skill that you're overlooking. And that is overlooked. Because if our team and the people that we have charge over, if they don't feel heard, there's no engagement. And I'll be inclined to say and think that there are some people on your team that you feel like are not engaged, and they might not be engaged, and it may be a result of how you're listening and responding to them. So we gotta do better. So let's break this down. Let's break this down into the three levels. There's three levels of listening. And I want you to evaluate where you stand in this, okay? So I would call this the bottom level. The bottom level of listening is the surface listening. And this is dangerous because you're hearing words, but you're not really listening to meaning. Maybe you're not all there in the moment. Maybe it's an individual that constantly brings problems to the table. Or maybe you just don't believe in that person's character. And this is dangerous because everyone has a heart. Okay? Everyone has a heart. And if you can ever get to the heart of a matter, you will be able to flesh out these things that we don't like. If you are to go back and think about it, there are probably things that have happened to you personally or to you in a group setting, and people, your peers or your coworkers. And because these things happen, you begin to put up a wall, and there's a wall for each person. Like, okay, I know you for if I tell you something in the office, I'm going to hear it again, whether it's confidential or not. I know you for that. So when you come to me and have a conversation, there's certain things that I'm already going to be cut off from because I know that's how you interact. There may be the person that's a little less mature. And because they are a little less mature or immature, you don't really hold their ideas with much weight. Like, okay, you're new here, you really don't know a lot, so you know what? That's cute. Thank you, goodbye. Right? So we're not holding their words in high regard because of how we view them. And this can cause us to have surface level listening. So I'm listening to you. The words really don't have meaning because I'm not really paying that much attention. Dangerous. The next type of listening, competitive listening. Now, competitive listening is we're halfway listening, but we're listening to respond. And this is where when you get those triggers, or you already, you know what, I already know the answer to what you're saying. Okay, I got my answer. You can stop talking, right? So while this happens a lot. Now, granted, I am working on this as well. But again, when you listen like this, sometimes you miss the heart of the issue. And when you miss the heart of the issue, you can label people. Matter of fact, let me rewind on that. You can mislabel people. Not because of what they said, but because of how you received what they said and you didn't give them the opportunity to finish what they're saying. And as leaders, oftentimes, because we know what we know, and because we've been doing this so long, we have sometimes we will mentally cut people off as they're talking because we've heard this before and we have the answer. And it's been working for so long. Like, I have a flawless track record in listening. I'm great. No complaints yet. But the problem with that is, especially as a leader, oftentimes you will not get the complaints. The team will talk about the complaints. The team will talk about their begrudging emotions towards you, their negative emotions. But when it comes to you, oftentimes you will never hear it. And as a result, now we as leaders are building ourselves up on this false foundation of perfection. So we have to evaluate that. We have to make sure that we're not engaged in competitive listening. Last one. This is the one that we want to ascend to. And that is active listening. Active listening says, I'm only listening to understand. I'm only listening to understand. As I'm listening to you, I am looking in your eye. I am listening to your words. I am processing this information that you're giving me, seeking to understand where you're coming from. That's it. And what active listening does, it now gives you the opportunity not just to hear the words, but to hear the emotion, to connect the dots so I can understand what is really happening here. Active listening. Active listening. And as you're actively listening, and after the conversation, the giver has given the information that they need to give, this is what I want you to practice. As you work on becoming an active listener, okay? Because I understand that it's not going to be an overnight type thing. It's not an overnight type thing. We're working towards it. But we can do this. The next conversation that you have, I want you to wait 3 seconds before you respond. Now, as you're listening, I want you to practice some body language also that lets them know you're listening. A brief, okay, a nod of the head, make some eye contact, because in that moment where you pause, the body language that you portrayed up until that point will give space for the pause, okay? So if you just sat there for the whole time this person's been talking and you're just staring at them with no type of emotion, staring in their face, and you may be processing, but the giver does not know that. The person delivering the information may not know that. So that is why it's important to give some type of body language that lets them know that you are hearing them. Nod your head. Okay, yes. And then at the end of their communication, pause. This is your processing moment. It's your turn to process. And then respond. This is where we are going in our communication. We're seeking not to respond first out of emotion. We want to respond out of logic. We want to understand. We want to get out of these first two rungs of listening, surface and competitive, and we want to get into active listening. Have you ever had one of those conversations where you're having a conversation and you respond and somebody says that's not what I meant. And you're like, wait a minute, so I mean, what did you mean? What did you mean? Better yet, one where you get offended through a conversation, you respond off emotion, the emotion of anger, only to find out that they didn't mean it like that. But because you've been triggered, you stop listening as they're still talking, preparing your response out of anger. Now you respond out of anger, which now triggers the other person, and both of you are at odds because you didn't take time to process the information because you were competitively listening. So let's work through what that looks like. I'm going to give you this story. This literally just happened. My wife's going to kill me. This literally just happened 2 days ago. So we went to a restaurant and we had it was a great meal. And there were some leftovers on the table, okay? I'm a big guy. I like to eat. This food at the restaurant was amazing, by the way. So there was a portion, it was like some crab or something that had some sauce or something on it. And we were passing around the table, people were tasting it, whatever. And so it gets to me, I taste it. I'm like, oh, okay, that's good. Anybody else want some more of this? Everybody's like, nah, I'm good. I'm like, okay, great. So I eat the rest of the crab. My wife looking at me side-eyed. I'm like, what, you want some? And she's like, nah, you good. You want to eat it? Eat it. Okay, cool. So we get home, and she asked me the questions. We're having a conversation, and she's like, I don't understand why you ate all the crab. And to me, I was like, wait a minute. Now she said some more stuff. However, in that moment, I was listening how? Competitively. I was triggered. I'm like, are you trying to say, in the words of these young folk, big back? I'm a big back. I'm greedy. Is that what you're trying to say? So I am now triggered emotionally. So I'm responding like, hey, like, I mean, I told you can have some. Like, what's the problem? What is the problem? And so again, it drove the conversation to the point of contention where I was emotional. She was like, why are you mad? And it was late at night, so I was tired. Side note. However, this is a great segue into how to navigate those type conversations. There's something that I did not do that I should have done. First of all, I was competitively listening. I heard something that I applied a meaning to, and I didn't ask a question. Okay? So this is what we do. In those moments, we ask clarifying questions. Like, what do you mean by that? Tell me more. Tell me more about that. Help me with that. Explain that to me. As we eliminate the competitive listening element, that's when we open ourselves up to hearing, not just with our ears, but with our heart. So as we're navigating through this material, I want you to hear that, number one, it's not an overnight thing. But number two, if we apply these tactics, we can get through to the active listening skill or level, right? We have been doing surface level and competitive. We have that. We got PhDs in surface level listening and competitive listening. Okay, we're just gonna have to take. I'll take that. I'm not gonna put it on you. I'll take that. I have a PhD in competitive listening. I mean, not surface. I think I graduated from surface, but competitive, yes, that's me all day. But these are the tactics that are going to help us through that. Okay, there's three. So, the 3-second rule, we talked about that. Pausing 3 seconds. So if you find that you've already started competitively listening, because you're going to have to catch yourself. You've been in the habit of this for so long, you're going to have to catch yourself. If you catch yourself in that, the pause is key. Wait. Oh, I don't think I heard all of that. So this is where we get into the second tactic. Tell me more. Tell me more. Tell me more. That will trigger an additional response. So maybe you missed something. Or maybe you don't understand something about the conversation. Tell me more. Tell me more about that so I can fully understand. Maybe you went into that competitive. Maybe you've been doing surface. So now you're realizing that. So, hey, tell me more about that because, I zoned out. You wouldn't tell them that, but tell me more, right? So the 3-second pause. Number 2, tell me more. And then number 3, mirror and labeling. My counselor has helped me largely with this in rephrasing. You're hearing somebody say something, you say, what I hear you saying is, or let me understand if I've got this right. What I hear you saying is ... And what you're doing now you're paraphrasing or rephrasing what they're saying to make sure that you have it right before you respond. Because if we're good at one thing that humans are good at, we're good at filtering information through a lens of our past and our present ideals of ourselves and society and what we see, the people around us, right? So there may be certain words or certain things that trigger you, and as you filter the words, bingo, I got one right here. This is going to help you. My wife and I have our phrases, right? One thing for me, total transparency. For me, I can't stand it when she harps on me like, oh yeah, you just so slow, you so slow. No, I process. So, when comments and conversations like that come up, I have to paraphrase it. So what are you trying to say? What are you trying to say about that? Are you taking a jab or is this a concern? Help me understand that. Now, granted, that hasn't always been the case. That you see how cool, calm, and collected that came across? No, that's not normally how it had happened in the past. This is after years and years of practice. However, I knew that was a trigger for me, so I know I processed that differently. So this is why rephrasing what you're hearing is important. So you're truly understanding what this individual is saying. So the 3-second rule, tell me more. And then number 3, mirroring and labeling. This is what I see. These are clarifying questions. So I want you to evaluate and ask yourself, the last 3 conversations that I've had, where was I at? Was I surface? Was I competitive? Was I active? I want you to evaluate that. And think about this now. And And we talk about everything from a leadership perspective. But remember, leadership starts with you leading you. And in that permeates to everyone around you. So not just at work, but at home with your family. Imagine if your family felt heard. How that would change the dynamics of your house. And for me, my home is my safe place. So when my safe place has peace, I can go out into the world with more resolve because I have peace at home. Now when things come at me at work, I have more resolve, fortitude to handle it. So imagine if your home, people at home, your family felt heard, what type of result that would produce. Now imagine if your team members at work, if they felt heard by you, how would that impact your team? And then overall, that affects your well-being. You're dealing with people now that are going to be more engaged, connected, and loyal. Why? Because they feel heard. So how are you listening? That's the question for you. How are you listening? Great leaders are not just great talkers. Great leaders are great listeners. And I want to challenge you to be a great listener. And I believe you can do that. Leaders Aware, we are now aware of how to correctly listen by active listening. And when we are aware, now that we're aware, we make the adjustments and do better. Be a better listener. Listen. As always, I love you guys. I appreciate you investing your time today. And I want you again to go out